Hello, and welcome to LinkedIn for Lawyers, true stories of client acquisition told by attorneys. My name is Rajan. I'll be your host for this half hour. We stream every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. It's pretty easy to catch us that way and find prior episodes. You do a quick search for LinkedIn for Lawyers. You put it in quotes. It's pretty easy. Likewise, you can find the show and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, which I personally use to listen to podcasts on my Android phone. So it's pretty easy to get a hold of us. So you could definitely like and subscribe and share this episode. I produce this as the co-founder of Video Socials. We are a marketing service predominantly for attorneys, but also accountants, coaches, and consultants. We come together in video blogging clubs and record together. We have a great time producing videos that then get posted on LinkedIn using our automation app. We're marketing partners with LinkedIn, but also with WordPress and Facebook and YouTube. So our automation software interfaces as push button posting. But I like to prove to people that LinkedIn is not just a social media like Facebook or TikTok to chat and hang out, but it's a productive tool. It's a way for us to develop relationships with potential clients and referral relationships. So LinkedIn does work. And I like to bring on, in this case, attorneys to talk about how they've gotten clients from LinkedIn. For example, our special guest today, Dan Cotter. I don't know if you can hear my phone that's ringing in the background. Hopefully you can't. But I forgot to mute it for this episode, but I have a pretty good directional mic, so it should be all good. Dan, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Vic. Look forward to the chat.
I'm looking forward to you just sharing, because you are among a very small minority of people in general, let alone attorneys, who have gotten business from LinkedIn to actually show that this thing works and that there are ways to do it. Some people hire marketing professionals to get it done. Some people are very strategic about it. It doesn't need to be that machine and strategic or contrived. It can be in a natural course of events, which I'd love to get to know you. Before we go into how LinkedIn has worked for your practice, can you share a little bit about your practice area, about the firm, about what you do for a living?
Sure. I'm an attorney at Howard & Howard Attorneys PLC out of the Chicago office. We were formed in Royal Oak, Michigan about 152, almost 153 years ago now. I
practice. You don't look that old.
Yeah, I'm not that old, but the firm is. I practice in the corporate and transactional group and have a pretty broad umbrella of practices. About half my work is insurance regulatory and transactional. I spent 16 and a half years in-house at insurance companies and handled pretty broad practices. And the other half is made up of outside general counsel work, where I help with all aspects of clients' needs, regardless of their size. I do some privacy and cyber within that. I've been doing that since '96. And so it's kind of a broad umbrella, but it's all under corporate and transactional, including complex transactions.
Do you find yourself working in specific sectors, or is it across the board, across industry, or? And when you say cyber, is it within the cyber industry or as the cybersecurity professional, like as from privacy as it turns to law?
So privacy and cyber, I mean, I started out, like I said, I worked 16 and a half years in-house, and I did privacy and cyber and developed disclaimers for CNA Financial back in the day when I was there as Y2K General Counsel. Sure. But that's turned into more of a broad, pretty industry agnostic in terms of privacy and cyber. I help companies and startups or existing companies with their web page disclaimers and privacy policies, including California and all the requirements out there, including GDPR.
Right.
I draft some incident response plans and also help them when they have breaches and things, and have been a coach for several clients.
Yeah, so it sounds like it is across the board, right? So it can be really large firms and really complex stuff, or it could be a relatively small company as well.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
That keeps it interesting, right? Because it's not necessarily all size fits all, right? I mean, you have to kind of determine what they actually need, or is it overkill, or what from a real
right. And depending on what they're collecting, and a lot of companies, depending on what they're selling, products or services, they've got everybody third party, right, in terms of taking credit cards, taking information. Right. So they don't have any information. So yeah, you're right. It really depends on the particular company.
Which is why I also asked about like the sector, but it sounds like it's across the board, right? So it can be from an e-commerce perspective where they're collecting credit cards, et cetera, or it could be informational where they're collecting email addresses and other type of personally identifiable information. So it varies per company. But do you find yourself, is there a cluster or a concentration in a particular area over another?
Not really.
No.
Because again, you see, I saw today that there was a $160 million settlement for a class action for a breach with a company. I don't remember the company right now. It's happening to everybody, right? Everybody's
Yeah,
subject to these hackers, and
right.
so it really is agnostic, and really don't see a cluster of any industry in particular.
Cool. So talk to me about the world of LinkedIn. When did you start using LinkedIn? What do you find yourself doing on LinkedIn? Are you very active? Do you consider yourself very active? Like, what do you do with LinkedIn before we actually get into how it worked for you?
So I've been using LinkedIn almost since the beginning.
Oh yeah,
When they celebrated their 10th anniversary, I got a note from the
Reid
founder. I can't
Hoffman.
remember his name right now.
Reid
Um,
Hoffman. Was it
I
Reid
think that's one
Hoffman
of the,
or one of his lackeys that sends automated emails?
well, it's probably, yeah, probably the latter. So I've been using it. When I joined LinkedIn, one of my former colleagues had said, "Hey, here's a great platform, for jobs and other things." And so back in the day, at least from what I recall, there was a very long questionnaire at the beginning that had a lot of questions. It wasn't like now, where you join and just kind of you can put a couple things up. It was
Yeah,
pretty detailed. It was almost like putting a resume in and typing it all in. And so I've been a member since. I do consider myself active. I'm on every day. I post about 3 to 4 or 5 times a week. Um,
so that's
Sometimes
practically
multiple.
daily. I mean, if you're four
Yeah,
or five times, five
yeah,
times the work week, right? So
yeah.
that's pretty active. So what are you posting? Like, what do you tend to put out there?
I post a wide variety of stuff. So I write and speak a lot and publish a lot. So I put those
Yeah.
things out when I write those articles. On
And
the weekends,
where do you have those? Not to cut you off, but where do you have those articles? Is it like on the firm's website, or is it publisher, or yeah? Talk to us about that.
it varies on my firm website. A lot of the things that I publish get posted there, but also just other stuff as well. And so I provide links or the PDF of those documents. On weekends, I tend to do book reviews. I started doing that last year or this year during the pandemic. And so on Saturday and Sunday, I'll write about a book that I've read during the previous week. Um, and so those get a lot of engagement.
Yeah.
I do a podcast on appellate decisions with a co-host, and so sometimes we post on that. I post a lot on cyber and privacy and other topics, so it just varies depending on what I've written or what's topical. I also spend a lot of time writing and thinking and reflecting upon the Supreme Court of the United States, and so that gets posted as well.
All right, I'm gonna parse that a little bit more because you laid out a lot of different like three major areas, right? You talked about book reviews, which I want to hear about of what's you're gonna give us a sneak preview, hopefully, of what this weekend's book review is gonna be about. Then I want to dive into what your podcast is about, who you interview around the appellate stuff, and then you talk about like SCOTUS and keeping up with SCOTUS uh, news in general. So talk to us about book review. So as by way of an example, if you don't want to give us a sneak preview, you could talk about last weekend, but hopefully here it's an exclusive sneak preview of what's coming out this weekend. What kind of books? And give us an example.
Sure. So one of the books that I'll post on probably tomorrow
Yeah,
is a book called Why Privacy Matters, and it's a book by a professor. I don't have his name offhand, but
real.
a very interesting book, and it talks about human privacy and information. And he starts with the premise that a lot of people will say that privacy is gone, but it's a dialogue and discussion about privacy and information flow. And it's important, I think, in the current, kind of world we live in,
Right.
as we talk about all the various, things that social media platforms are doing, including LinkedIn. So that'll be tomorrow. Sunday, I haven't decided yet, although I had written a mini review for the Chicago Bar Association that I might expand on Stacey Abrams' novel. She
Oh,
wrote
great.
a kind of a political thriller slash legal genre book that's entertaining about a Supreme Court justice that goes into a coma and
Yeah.
his clerk is now, running wild trying to implement his thoughts, and there's a case pending. It's kind of an interesting, twist on, what do you do with lifetime tenure when there's nothing in the Constitution like the 25th Amendment for the president.
That's great, and I mean, she's able to bring her variety of experiences as an attorney as well as an author, and she's able to bring it all into it. And I guess it also does explores real type of issues, which a lot of these type of thrillers do talk about, right? Of kind of real if then, what if type scenarios. So they're not thus exclusively nonfiction work in the world of privacy, right? This is an example of a novel, but it's factual fiction, so to speak.
Yeah.
What are some of the kind of books that you explore? And how
Uh,
many books do you read at a time? Because this is, not I'm gonna guess that these aren't like short books, right? These are both of
no,
those that you mentioned can be pretty heady.
like I said, I try to read 2 books a week, and on
Yeah.
holidays, like next week when I'm off for a few days, I'll have a lot of reading time.
Right.
During travel and stuff, it's more difficult, but it's a pretty broad range. So I read some things on the Supreme Court. I read things about history. I read nonfiction. I read a book about it was called Metabolism. I can't remember the full title, but it talked about processed foods
Oh,
and
okay.
diets and kind of all kinds of things. So and
And
what
was
happened,
was that like a passion project, or is there any relevance to clients or?
now, what happens more and more lately is I get emails or I get things on LinkedIn. I'll
Sure.
get private messages, or on the post that I make, someone will say, "Well, you should check out this book,"
Right.
or "You might want to read this book. I loved it," and always interested. And so when I see those books, I get right on the Chicago Public Library, see if they have it, and if they don't, I'll tend to buy a book from Amazon. So
Sure.
I have a pretty broad interest in reading and a wide variety of things. And I'd read somewhere, I forget which, executive or billionaire or legal person, they talked about like reading a bunch of different stuff, because even fiction, like you said, and all this different stuff, you can kind of tie it together, and it kind of helps your thought process and a lot of things, and including, helping my clients with their needs and situations. You never know what you're going to read in a book that then makes you think about something else.
Yeah, especially in your world where you can pull in a variety of viewpoints and you're talking to clients. So from that aspect, you want to be that much more nimble. So good for you, right? Because you don't want all work and no play. Makes
Right.
a dull day. So from that aspect, that's tremendous. So that helps you. There's that other saying that leaders are readers, right? So from that aspect, you are a thought leader and you are able to distill that perspective. So that's really neat. So that's the weekend of content. Then you also have your podcast, which itself produces content. So talk to us about that. Is it a video podcast? Is it audio only? It's an interview show, it sounds like. So who do you interview? How often do you do that? And thus, how does it relate to your LinkedIn postings?
Sure. So the podcast is the Podium and Panel podcast,
So
and
say that again. What's the name of the show?
the Podium and Panel.
Okay.
It's audio only, although we use video to, it helps with queuing and
Right.
kind
And
of reactions.
sure.
We have special episodes where we do invite advocates that have argued cases to speak with us, whether it's before the Supreme Court of the United States or other courts. We focus on Illinois and Indiana courts, including the federal courts in those. And my co-host Pat Eckler and I, every Sunday we tape it, and we started in January of 2021. And we cover oral arguments that are at the appellate level, either at again the state court level, the federal courts, including up to the Supreme Court of the United States.
Yeah.
And we usually cover 3 cases. We talk about some various rules, and then we post those. And then we have special episodes with, again, advocates that have argued in these cases. We try to get them on to talk about it, and have an open dialogue. And so it's been a lot of fun. And
Yeah.
again, that does create content. We've got, on LinkedIn, the Podium and Panel link. And so every week we also make predictions about the cases we talk about. And so we've kept a running score of our records, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
But
So, well, yeah. Let's not gloss over that, Dan. What's so? How are you doing? What's your average right now?
I think we're like 84, 15, and 7. So occasionally we punt because it's hard to predict from, the type of cases, or we don't have knowledge.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Right.
we've gotten predictions wrong 15 times, which sounds like a great record, but it's, some cases that we cover, it's pretty obvious, from the questioning and stuff. And others, it's more difficult to really predict
Yeah.
what,
Well, fair enough. Good for you. 85 is not. Yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
better than most.
yeah,
That's cool. It's good so we could come to you for that too. That's
yeah.
it's not bad. So you tape it Sundays, and how do you and when do you release it? How often is it released, and where do people find it? Is it on the podcast platforms? Where?
It is. It
Yeah.
is. It's on. Um, we tape using Squadcast, and
Yep.
then we upload it to Anchor.
Yep.
Anchor's our home base, and then it gets distributed, like you said, with you can watch it, you listen to it on Apple or Stitcher or all those various
Or
places.
Spotify. I think Spotify owns Anchor
Yeah,
now, so
Spotify.
I'm assuming
Yeah,
Spotify. So that's cool.
yeah. Anchor
And
distributes it. Yeah.
and then do you send it out by email, or is it on your website? Like, or is there part of that regular distribution?
So we don't have a website for the podcast per se,
Okay.
but what happens is my co-host every week, when it's posted, he posts on LinkedIn, and that's really the only platform that
Yeah.
we really advertise it right now.
That makes
Uh,
sense. I mean, just skim the topic. It's not
yeah,
really your typical TikTok type post. So
and it's
okay, yeah,
it's primarily for lawyers, and
yeah,
primarily for lawyers that are do appellate work.
yeah.
So you're talking about a pretty small slice compared to
Right, right, right.
a lot of
Yeah,
other more general interest podcasts that are out there.
yeah, that makes sense. That's cool. So that's a promotion from there. Have you gotten business from your podcast? Have any of the guests that have come on, have they been referral relationships to others, and has that produced, or is it purely like a passion project because of your profession?
It's for me. I don't think there's been any business, just
Yeah.
because again
Okay.
I don't really litigate, but there
Yeah.
have been inquiries and follow up with various topics, and we talked some about privacy and like the
Right. That's why I
Information
asked. Like, is
Privacy
it
Act.
like even
So
indirectly?
so there's that where people will follow up with that stuff.
Cool.
My co-host does insurance defense,
Right.
and so I haven't asked him directly, but I think that he's probably gotten some traction and get
Sure.
some follow up based on again his expertise and things. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And we got to get to like the main point of the show, which is how you get business from LinkedIn. Um, Pat is your co-host. You said Pat Eckler.
Yes.
Did you come to our podcast event last week for the show hosts?
No, I missed it.
Yeah, I'm
I
forgetting
thought
like
we
what
did
we
the
chatted
one
on
in
LinkedIn
January.
about it. Yeah, so you're coming January. Hopefully Pat can come January too, because he'll
No,
have
invite
a
him.
whole different perspective. So
Yeah.
that's really cool. So let's actually dive into like the specific topic, which for me, like all this stuff is really interesting. I think all this shines a light of how the stuff you do on LinkedIn is not in a vacuum. Like it is a culmination. It's basically a watershed of everything else that you're doing. So, as much as like we didn't go straight into it like we do in other shows of like, all right, how do you get business from LinkedIn? I think this buildup is tremendously informative, insightful, if not inspirational for others who go, oh, this LinkedIn thing doesn't work. Well, what are they working on? Like, what are they doing? I mean, you're putting a lot into it. It's passion, it's what you enjoy, but there's productive value there in itself, right? You're reading for productive value for yourself, so you may as well turn that into content. You want to keep up with what's happening with different cases, so you may as well turn that into a podcast. And all of this turns into content marketing, to use that phrase for your practice for the firm. So it's great. So give us an example of how all of this stuff that you are throwing into the LinkedIn soup, how has that benefited you? How have you gotten a client from LinkedIn?
Sure. A couple of things come to mind. One is, as I mentioned, I've been on a long time.
Yeah.
Spent a long time in house at insurance organizations, and so a lot of my contacts. I mean, I have broad contacts of all kinds of folks, but a lot in the insurance space. And so on several occasions, I've had folks where I've posted something and get an inbox, a note from them saying, "Hey, I want to introduce you to so and so. I've moved to a new company." And at least in several instances, given that expertise in things, that has translated to direct business because the introduction's made. Somebody says, "Hey, check out Dan Cotter's post on this. He knows what he's talking about and
Right.
XYZ area." So that's happened in the insurance space, and it's been productive. It's also happened in the data privacy and cyberspace for the same reasons. somebody, would post it to, or circulated my thing. The beauty of LinkedIn with millions of users, right, is that if somebody in your chain or even not sees in their scroll something that's beneficial and on point to them, and they recirculate it to their groups, you end up with, getting an invite from somebody saying, hey, I saw that we're connected with so and so. They posted something that you wrote or talked about. I'd
Yeah.
love to learn more. And that happens. It's not, it's not like you can quantify and say like it happens every week or month. But I think, one of the things that we've been talking about is being active on LinkedIn and kind of really putting out things out there that will then turn to visibility and future work and referrals and connectivity. And you do become a subject expert if you can find that niche where you're posting all the time on something, so that it becomes, hey, Vic is the guy for this, right? And
Yeah.
I want to meet Vic and reach out to him.
And I think well said, Dan, because ultimately it's top of mind, and you're in a very specific area where it's not like happening, maybe happening all the time, but it may not happen all the time in your circle. But when it does, you're top of mind. They see you, where there's that word of mouth concept happening because you're putting it out there and you're active. Because the opposite is also true. If you're out of sight, you're out of mind, and thus out of those
Right.
referrals. And it's like silly to ignore the platform where, as you said, there are millions of users, but there are thousands of these. This is your Rolodex, a living Rolodex. So congratulations on that, where you're able to literally see that you're posting and people are referencing those posts when they're referring you. So that becomes collateral material, because that's the easiest way for people to essentially legitimize you, right? Of saying, this is the why you got to go to Dan. He's the go-to expert for this reason. That's tremendous. We're going to take a quick commercial break. Okay. When we come back, I would love for you to share a couple of things, or one thing that you really love about LinkedIn, and then share with us something that you really don't like about LinkedIn, something that really annoys you. I know there's tons of stuff about LinkedIn that, as much as I love LinkedIn, there are things that really rub me the wrong way, of like head scratchers. So there may be something that you really love and something that you really don't love. And we'll come back after a minute.
Do you want your own podcast like this one? My team will do all the grunt work for you. Just show up, smile, and enjoy talking to your potential clients and referral relationships. Go to videosocials.net/govip to watch our 9-minute webinar for all the details. Are you a busy lawyer, coach, consultant like me? You should have a podcast done for you to get you more clients, impress your colleagues, and it becomes your perpetual referrals flywheel. We find you the right guests. We schedule your guests, handle all the podcast tech, get you into Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and more, done for you. Go to videosocials.net/govip to watch our 9-minute webinar for all the details. Now back to the show.
And back to our guest, Dan. And Dan, you mentioned right when we were talking about Pad and the podcast event for January 27th, and I think I kind of rushed over that, and I should kind of mention to the audience like what we were talking about. So January 27th, we're bringing folks like you over to our event. We did the first one last week in December. So the second one, the first one was great. It was like over 100 participants. We did breakout rooms, and basically the premise was like, people like us who host shows, we often like to be on other people's shows and be interviewed as a guest expert. Case in point, like what we're doing here, Dan. And I like being on other people's shows. And a lot of our clients and members have their own live streams and podcasts and audio podcasts and video interview podcasts. So for me to bring together all those people is tremendous. I think right now we're up to, I want to say about 35 show hosts RSVP'd as of today, December 15th. So I'm sure we'll be kind of well over 100 again for January 27th. So thanks so much for coming, Dan. I'm looking forward to seeing you on the 27th. And thanks again for coming on the show and kind of sharing your own experience, because this isn't like a show of pontificating and lessons from like all high and mighty of gurus telling us what we should be doing. It's from your own experience of what you found works and what you're able to keep up with even in your busy schedule. So as we wrap up, what's something that you really love about LinkedIn?
I love that for the most part it's substantive stuff and that it's relevant and that you can find great streams and great posts from great people, and meeting people like yourself, and being able to network and build that, like I said, virtual Rolodex, and that it's transferable no matter, where you go or end up. You don't have to recreate kind of that platform. And so
Yeah.
I love it for that.
And so it's substantive, right? So it's productive, it's professional. And as much as when Microsoft took over LinkedIn, they made a lot of changes to make it more sticky, to make the messenger more, the inbox more messenger chat-like, which I love because it removes the formality of an email. Even if there is, sometimes people aren't that formal by email, but it brings it to the informality of a text message, which can be very convenient because, it's only so many salutations I can give when I just want to have a quick one-sentence question. Those are things that I love about LinkedIn. And I'm also happy that they didn't go the route of Facebook or Instagram and TikTok of trying to be truly a social media, because they're probably the only dominant, platform for real peer-to-peer, professional-to-professional business networking. And for it to be social networking, social media is a nice generic word for it, but it's not really, right? It is a productive platform where we can have productive conversations and do business and not feel awkward, because it's sometimes awkward to do that on Facebook where we're hanging out. And if someone's like pitching themselves or trying to do business, it's like I'm there kind of in my PJs and or at a barbecue, literally, figuratively. And so on LinkedIn, it's meant for this stuff. It's meant for us to exchange business cards, literally and figuratively. So that's really cool. What's something that you don't like about LinkedIn? What's something that over all these years that you've been active on LinkedIn, it still annoys you?
The thing I don't like, and that seems to happen more frequently, is the invites. I'm pretty open about accepting invites, but then immediately getting hammered with, can we get on a chat and try to sell me something. Also, there seems to be a misidentification a lot. There must be a Daniel A. Cotter,
Oh, yeah.
who is a dentist, and one that's an accountant, because I get constantly emails and posts about improving my dental practice, and I try to respond. I'm not a dentist. I'm like on Rudolph, right? You want to be the dentist? No, I'm not a dentist. So um, that's kind of stuff that bugs me. And then at times the politics creeps in, and again, like you said, Facebook, Twitter, all that's loaded with that stuff. So for me, LinkedIn is somewhere I want to be, to not engage in the political,
Right.
attacks on one party or the other. I
Yeah.
really want it to be about, substantive and professional.
Right. Yeah. I think for the most part, LinkedIn does a good job. I mean, it's all users, right? It's not really LinkedIn policing, but people know, like, this is a workplace, this is a professional environment that, if you want to have that kind of heated conversation, or I should say petty conversation, take it to social media. It can still be productive, right? I mean, you can have a political discourse in a productive way, perhaps, especially if it's a lot of people's professions. And that's one aspect. The only other thing I would say, of course, Dan Cotter, I guess, is a popular name. Luckily, you're being associated with an accountant and a dentist, right? I mean, there could be far worse circumstances. There may be far worse Dan Cotters out there. So at least, good thing, all the Dan Cotters seem to be pretty reputable. So that's a pretty good thing.
That's right.
Yeah, you can't go wrong if you meet a Dan Cotter. And then, like, the first thing you mentioned, on behalf of like the marketing profession, where I'm training people to pitch themselves, but in an appropriate way. Yeah, there's no reason to pitch before the relationship. Like, I think it's meant for the relationship platform as opposed to a spamming platform. I mean, there's always a time and place to pitch and to see if there's a need, right? I mean, we all have to do that as professionals. Like, we need to fulfill a need. That's okay. But to do it like it's the cart before the horse, it's like the whole point is to develop the relationship and develop some type of a working arrangement. And then, of course, to see if there's a need. And that can happen over time. And you do that for your own profession. I have to do that, and everyone else should do that appropriately. So, I mean, that's just, LinkedIn makes money sometimes on those sponsored messages, et cetera. So they got to make money somehow. They're doing okay as a company bought out by Microsoft. So I won't necessarily fault them there. But that's like the nature of the beast. But that's a good love and hate, so to speak, of how you use LinkedIn. Dan, this has been phenomenal. Thank you for taking the time of giving us a glimpse into what I'll call your content marketing, but also how you're active in your profession as a thought leader, as a subject matter expert. How can people get a hold of you? What's the easiest way for people to ask you questions, get around cybersecurity and the legal regulations around that, or your book reviews, your podcasts, et cetera? How do people get into your world?
Well, thanks for having me back. First and foremost, you can find me on LinkedIn. Also, my email is dac@h2law.com. And my phone number, the best one to reach me is my cell, 312-502-7480. And hopefully I look forward to chatting with anybody who's interested in chatting with me.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm sure people will reach out. Obviously, it makes sense for people to reach out to you through LinkedIn. So if you do get this Dan Cotter or any other Dan Cotter, be sure to mention LinkedIn for Lawyers. I'm sure the dentist and the accountant will be confused. Maybe they'll listen in Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern on LinkedIn, on my Facebook, on our YouTube channel, or through all the podcast platforms that we mentioned that Dan is also active on, like Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, that I personally use. And I'm looking forward to meeting all of you as an audience for your questions around your own video interview podcast. And thank you to Dan once again. My name is Vikram Rajan, co-founder of Video Socials and the host for LinkedIn for Lawyers, true stories of client acquisition told by attorneys. See you next time. Thank you, Dan.
Take care.